This is the lecture on the payroll profession and legislation. In this lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about the actual profession of payroll and also talk about some of the most key important legislations that affect the way a payroll professional would do their job. And we're also going to talk about a lot of things that will eventually become more important in future lectures as we learn how to do deductions. Now, first of all, the payroll profession has many different job opportunities that are available. And like a lot of business opportunities, the key thing is diversity. Every industry has the option and the possibility of payroll jobs. So it doesn't matter if it's a healthcare related industry, education, natural resources, computer companies. Every industry has a need for good quality payroll professionals. Also, a lot of businesses actually hire their own payroll personnel to internally process the payroll, but then again some businesses decide to outsource those duties, and you could always actually get a job with a firm that contracts the payroll work out to other companies. So lots of variety in the overall payroll profession. Now, of all the responsibilities that a payroll professional has, there are many that are common to just about every industry. And first of all, if you take a look at time worked data, that simply means keeping a record of all the hours that the employees worked. And there are many ways to do that. You can have electronic time cards, electronic surveillance system that will verify when a person entered the premises and when they left. And all that factors into the payroll data so that you will know exactly when the person worked. You're also responsible for pay rate changes. From time to time, salaries will change, hourly wages will change, and as that happens, you have to go into the payroll system and update all the pay rates. So that is a responsibility of a payroll professional. Also, a payroll professional has tax-related responsibilities. And we're going to talk a lot about various tax rates all throughout this course. And from time to time, these tax rates change. So a payroll professional has to always keep on top of things in terms of the latest changes in taxes so that you're always deducting the proper amounts. Also, the deductions are the responsibility of the payroll professional. And there are many different deductions. They range from various taxes to health insurance to benefits, and in some cases even optional deductions. And over the course of the entire semester, we're going to talk about all the different potential deductions that might have to be made from a person's pay. You're also responsible for new employees, getting them put into the payroll system, updating that employee's information. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And also marital status and allowance changes. You could have the same employees from period to period, but those employees might need to make changes to their status, their allowance choices, and things like that. So that's also the responsibility of a payroll professional. Now, in terms of legislation, there are many different items of legislation that affect a payroll professional's job. And it's very important that we keep up with the latest developments because many times legislation changes from year to year. And it's important that we are in compliance with all these laws to make sure that we're following these things exactly according to our duties and our responsibilities. Now, the first piece of legislation that we're going to talk about is the Fair Labor Standards Act. This is the act that actually established the minimum wage, and it also established overtime pay requirements. And later on, when we start calculating gross pay, we're going to have to learn all the various rules about minimum wage, who falls under the minimum wage provisions, and also the rules about overtime. And when we learn those rules, all of those are coming from the Fair Labor Standards Act. This act also has certain reporting requirements and also requires certain records to be maintained. So many of the calculations and records that we are going to maintain as part of this course, we are doing so simply because of the Fair Labor Standards Act requirements. So this is a very important act, and it's going to affect a lot of the things that we're going to learn about throughout the course. The next act is the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, or FICA for short. And this act establishes the FICA taxes. And there are two components, Social Security and Medicare. And we will eventually learn how to calculate both of these taxes. We're going to have certain rates that will have to be used. And in some cases, there are going to be limits on the income level at which we would actually hold out these taxes. But these are two of the major deductions that the payroll professional does have to withhold from all the employees' pay. And these also affect the employer because the employer will be matching these as well. So these are also very important tax rates that will affect our work. Then we have the income tax withholding laws. And again, we're going to have income tax withholding. We need to know all the details. We need to know the person's marital status. We need to know the withholding allowances that they're claiming. We need to know all the percentages for the current year. And more so than any other laws, these laws will change every single year. So when we begin doing our income tax withholding calculations, those calculations might be one way this semester, but even as soon as the very next year, the percentages will change and those calculations would be affected. So it's very important that we know the latest developments on our income tax withholding laws. Then we have the Unemployment Tax Act. Now this establishes rules for unemployment taxes, and we're going to potentially have unemployment taxes at both the federal as well as the state level. So we will also have to potentially have deductions for these taxes. And again, these rules also can change potentially from year to year. So a payroll professional would have to keep up with the latest developments in regard to unemployment. And then there are various other legislations that also affect payroll. For example, the Civil Rights Act. That has a big effect on payroll, and also with hiring of employees. This is the act that guarantees that no one should be discriminated based on their race or their religion in terms of hiring. So that's a very important act, and many times you will see a disclaimer listed on job applications and even job postings that literally states that we abide by that Civil Rights Act. Then we have the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. This is an act that is designed to protect people against age discrimination or ageism. And again, we do not want to discriminate someone based upon their age. So unless we can show that there's a legitimate reason why a person could not actually work a certain job, otherwise we would have to hire that person if there were no other qualified people available. And then we have the Americans with Disability Act. Again, has to do with discrimination. As long as the person is capable of performing the duties that are required by the job, then we would not be able to discriminate against that person if they are a qualified applicant. Then we have the Immigration Reform and Control Act. And this act affects us because we don't want to get into a situation as a business where we hire someone who is actually not authorized to work in our country. So we always have to keep up with the latest developments on that. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a later lecture. And then we have the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And this act deals with all the individuals that are in our armed forces. And if someone is in active military duty, we have to guarantee that person their job when they come back. And we also have to guarantee that they will have the same caliber of job in terms of the seniority. So that's a very important requirement as well. Now, in terms of payroll records, there are many different records that we're going to be involved in recording and keeping in this particular course. But there are many things that actually affect payroll. Even something as simple as our job posting. How is that job posting worded? What information is included or not included? And that job posting, that has to be exact. When we put that out there, we want that to be as accurate and as appropriate as possible. The payroll professional also has involvement with the job application process and determining not only the design of the job application, but also how that job application is scrutinized and how it is looked at. And then we have the personnel file. We definitely have to have a file on every employee so that way we know their marital status, their withholding allowances, their benefit selection. That must be maintained. And then when we start to get into the actual calculations, we will eventually take a look at the payroll register and also the employee earnings record, which provides very detailed information about all the pay and all the deductions that were calculated.